welcome. And before I go too deep into the program, it's a case of do not adjust your sets. You are watching the week in review, but normally at this point I would say we go through 10 big stories from the week. However, during the month of Ramadan, we will be going through 5 big stories from the week. However, what is unchanged is that I have friend and colleague Mamodu Mboj to go through the stories with me. Mr. Mboj, as always, welcome to the program.
As always, I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. And so, as I said, 5 stories, not the usual 10. And after Ramadan, we will revert, hopefully, to our 10 stories. So we look at the reshuffle of the cabinet by His Excellency the President that just happened overnight. We look at the language in education policy, teaching using our local languages rather than the foreign imported language of English that we've been instructing people in. Also attaining universal electricity access by 2025, quite an ambitious one. And so 3 stories from home and then 2 abroad. We go to Senegal next door, where Ousmane Sonko has been released and he's been joining Diomaye Faye and others to campaign over this weekend for the elections, which will be held on the 24th of March. And then for our final story, we'll be going to Nigeria, where they have lifted the sanctions on neighboring Niger. So those are the 5 stories we have for you today. Okay, I hope you like them. Anyway, the first one, a really big one, and our report said it caught some people by surprise. What did? The reshuffle. Have a look and have a listen.
The Gambia's President Adama Barrow replaced Basic and Secondary Education Minister Kulidana Cole, who is now redeployed to the Foreign Service, with Ms. Hadija Tosi, and Information Minister Lamin Queen Jami with Dr. Ismaila Sise, a political science lecturer at the University of the Gambia. The Energy and Petroleum Minister Abdi Job is now reassigned to the Ministry of Tourism and Culture, while Nani Juara, Managing Director of NAWEC, is now appointed Minister of Energy and Petroleum. Gallo Saidi assumes the role of Managing Director of NAWEC. Tourism and Culture Minister Hamad Nkeba is now reassigned to the Ministry of Lands, Regional Government and Religious Affairs, replacing Usman Sow, who is back as the Director General of the State Intelligence Service. Lamin Jadama, current SIS boss, is redeployed to the Foreign Service.
We didn't give you all the names, Mr. Mboj, and I don't think we needed to. Just a few of the headline ones. And people have been saying for the last 6-7 months he's going to reshuffle, and I guess one day they would be right, and that one day has come. Were there any surprises for you in the reshuffle?
Well, for me, the first thing that sort of stood out, I thought, God, does our president have a kind of Shakespearean calendar manager for the shuffles? Because I remember when Usain Dabo was relieved of his position, it was on the 15th of March. Beware the Ides of March.
Beware the Ides of March, which just happens to be my sister's birthday, by the way.
You see?
Yes,
absolutely.
yes.
And you journalists, we love these things, you know, the snakes and ladders of politics. And this is it. Who's in, who's out, who's moving up, who's coming down. Of course, the headline grabbing appointments, really.
Well,
Dr. Cisse, Al-Mawali Sabali. So, fantastic. It will be interesting.
Well, this is it. And we had a discussion when the list was issued, and somebody said, oh, but he hasn't given an explanation as to why. Well, he's the president. He doesn't have to explain to anybody.
Absolutely, doesn't.
He can do. Yes.
Yes, and in the discussions, you could just hear some of our younger staff sort of kind of expect a minister to be kind of a technocrat.
Yeah,
right. Which is a completely different thing. You can mix ministers about. How many times in Britain you've had ministers of health, but they were not doctors?
Yeah, absolutely. many times.
Many times.
And minister of defense who've never been in the army.
Who's never been in the army. Stuff like that.
Yes,
so you bring them in for all those skills.
Because you have civil servants who can provide the technical details and the know-how.
And all kinds of advices.
Well, this is it.
You have access to all sorts of advice because of your position and stuff like that. So this is it. I just want them to be able to deliver. Sure. You know what I mean? To be able to do things. What can you do? Deliver practical results.
That's it.
As it were.
That's it.
That's
and the majority have been literally reshuffled. They've been moved to other ministries. A few have been let go, and and we have a few additions who are sort of completely new to the cabinet, but most of the big ones, trade and so on, they've stayed untouched. You know, finance untouched, as one would expect. But yes,
absolutely. Sort of what do you call it? The inner core,
the
stable
energy
core.
In recent times has come to be one of those, but there's been a change there.
Yeah, because you see, Ibrahim Silla rarely touched. Dr. Samate Health, really not touch at all. Foreign Affairs, Dr. Tangara, not touch. So you have sort of the stable pillars, can we call them that possibly?
Sure.
And then sort of, I wouldn't call it tinkering, but changes
not
on the
quite
edges.
moving the deck chairs, but at least
absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Perhaps the next question would be, okay, to what effect?
What I was going to say, because this is a case of, you know, keeping ministers on their toes, to say that, look, you know, yes, you are the minister, but that job is not carved in stone. And if I so desire, I can move you. But the discussion that then comes with it, of course, is that do people get moved because the president is dissatisfied with their performance? Might that be it? Or does he just think, okay, maybe somebody else can do this better, and you know, because some of them have been moved, you know, to other ministries rather than just let go completely.
Absolutely, it will be quite fascinating, really, to know the president's thought processes as he thinks about these things.
Sure.
And you know, they can shuffle, change for whatever reason, for any number of reasons, really. Because you will wonder why move one from, for instance, tourism to lands. Yes. How was the performance of tourism?
Sure.
What is it you think you can take to land?
Sure.
You know what I mean? So one would like to think that you have such processes.
Sure.
And really, that should be his prerogative. For us, we just focus on the delivery.
Indeed.
What is it they can deliver? You have the privilege, the prerogative of appointing whoever, anywhere. Then we'll start judging them on their delivery, the performance.
Thank you for that. And in case anybody is just joining us at this point, we're only having 5 stories this time. So if we get to the 5th story and you've just joined and you think, hang on a minute, why have they stopped? It's because during Ramadan we'll only have 5 stories. So I might keep making that reminder, and we'll try and not to spend too long on some, but I think you'll forgive us for this one. It's quite a big one. And the next one is also quite a big one. And this is a debate that has raged in many countries. Do we teach in our local language, or do we teach in these languages imposed upon us by colonizers? Well, in the Gambia, we're making strides to start teaching in local languages. Have a look.
This announcement at a press conference on Wednesday aims to incorporate languages such as Wolof, Mandinka, Pular, Jola, Sarahule, Serial and Manjago into the education curriculum. Since its inception in 2022, the policy underwent rigorous surveys and consultations, culminating in its validation in 2023. The core objective of this landmark policy are to enhance learning outcomes, preserve cultural heritage, improve communication, increase participation, facilitate the transition to formal education, and promote community engagement.
People who are made to think, learn in a language which is alien to them, to the detriment of their own language, a language who defines their identity and whose culture they are rooted in. This is a monumental task that we have before us. And if we are going to succeed in what we have planned, then we must commit ourselves, body and soul, to the implementation of the policy.
Sidi Ajata there. Mr. Mbo, this is one which might seem easy, but it's also quite contentious. And I say contentious because if you have only ever been instructed in a language from the age of 4 or 5 till you're 15 or 16, can you still refer to that as an alien language? Because that is almost for the same time you would have been instructed or spoken your own language. And so but we know why it's being done, because it has been used as the reason for why the Gambia seems to be lagging behind in the so-called imported languages, as I mentioned, English and French and so on. Other countries seem to be surging ahead, even some of our neighbors, and yet for us it seems to be a bit of a struggle, and that's why we're undertaking this step, really.
Absolutely, and Sidia there himself being a linguist.
Well, indeed, yes, quite.
I thought, what a far cry. When we were at school, no vernacular.
No, I was actually going to use the very same phrase.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So this sort of
It's
language
a change,
hierarchies
isn't it? Yes,
and
quite.
that sort of thing.
Right.
And in fact, this wasn't really the first time that we've introduced this.
It's been
in
tried
2015, isn't it? Early grade reading ability, that was the whole idea.
That's right.
So we must learn why that didn't really kick off, because this aspect of having what they call mother tongue instruction, mother tongue schooling.
Yes.
It's been an idea. They first introduced it really in 1961
There you are.
by the heads of government in Addis Ababa.
That's right.
But still, it hasn't
when
quite
it was in the
taken
Organization of
off.
African Unity.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So why has it been slow, really, for it to take hold?
Quite.
Because with the science, as Sidia Jatta would know more than I do,
Quite.
we know that mother tongue instruction is superior.
Yes,
It
quite.
helps understanding and that sort of thing. Then when you bring in English,
Yes,
it
quite.
must be
Mainly.
multilingual,
Well,
at least
yes.
bilingual, because English is also the language of international communications,
Well.
the language of technology.
This is
You
it.
need both.
Yes.
But it's better to have your embedding.
Quite.
Your
I mean,
own
I
tongue
had the discussion with
understand.
somebody, and they were
Yes.
talking about, at some point that in the future they thought Mandarin, and I said, well, no. If you check in China, the most widely spoken language other than Chinese stroke Mandarin is English.
Absolutely.
And so, English really is the international language, and
You go to
we
India,
have to get over that.
Yes, you go to India, in
quite.
spite of all their language. I think English is second only to Hindi.
Yes.
So that's it.
This is
So
it.
this is it. So we cannot get away from that. But again, one understands the value
Sure.
of mother tongue instruction.
Well, this is
The
it.
quicker, the
Yeah.
earlier we introduce it, the
This is
better.
it. So, as I said, one that we look forward to with great anticipation. That's our second story already. And now to third story, another ambitious project, which that one that we just discussed, I certainly think is. I think the other one is the announcement of the Gambia trying to attain universal electricity access by 2025. That's next year, by the way. And we're already in March 2024. Have a look.
The overarching objective of the Electricity Access Project is to achieve universal access by end 2025. A number of the communities in central Badibu will be electrified, as well as others under the ECOWAS Regional Electricity Project. This year, the ECORIP project has 292 communities, and the contractor is currently working phase-wise. They were in the West Coast region. Right now they are in the Phoenix and will subsequently move to LRR, North Bank region, CRR region.
Samboja, I said an ambitious project there. Universal electricity access. I mean, for those of us who struggle sometimes have frequent outages, this might seem quite a pipe dream, but they're trying to hit it in under a year's time, because we're talking about 2025.
Absolutely, and one recognizes the improvements they've done.
For
You
sure.
know, we quoted the World Bank data
Yep.
telling us that in 2017 electricity access was what, 56%
Yep.
or so. By 2021 it had gone up to 63.7.
Sure.
But when we take that as the rate of growth, of expansion,
improvement, yeah.
so I don't
Yeah.
think 2025 it
Yeah.
will happen. The universal stuff is
Sure,
talking
sure.
about. But of course we are in the right direction. Fantastic.
We've got
You know,
OMVG
we've got
project
OM asset,
still to come on board. We last weekend we had the
Solar
solar
plant.
project, which will be
Absolutely.
contributing to that. So it's not all coming from a central grid, and I think that's the point. And some of the kind of more ambitious targets, they're going for them because, for example, I think the government of China are trying to help them with the solar one, as we heard and saw last week, to see if they can help them hit this target, but it's quite ambitious to hit it by next year.
Absolutely, and in the short and intermediate term, we're bound to have a combination of renewables,
yes, indeed,
and
yes.
fossil
and
fuels,
for
a while before we
quite.
completely efface, if you like, fossil fuels.
Well, this is it.
So,
but, you know, when I said to somebody, and we were in a WhatsApp group, and he said, I've just looked at Gambia on the map. He said, but it's a tiny country. How come it's taking them this long? Lots of reasons, but but that is where we find ourselves. So, but something to look forward to, certainly. Sure.
Absolutely. For me, when they say stuff like that, Gambia small, this and that, I said, yes, but here you're dealing with human beings. We are not any less complex than anywhere else, really, when you think about it. So this is it. And afterwards, when I saw access, universal access, then I wrote on it, and supply, constant supply.
Well, for me, and that's why at the beginning I said, for those of us who suffer frequent outages, we will smile at universal access, but supply is the key thing.
That sort of thing, so can we really have that as well, that constant supply?
Yeah, that's what we dream of.
Yeah, absolutely, but as long as you're taking the right steps,
sure.
Then the populace, we wouldn't complain much. It is when we think that they're not doing the right thing.
Quite.
That is the stuff that frustrates,
Yeah,
even hurts, as it were. Yes. But when we think that you're going in the right direction,
then everybody buys into it. Thank you for that. Thank you. Story number 4, which is our penultimate story, unlike in usual programs, and next door in Senegal, I mean. Elections are set to go ahead on the 24th of March, presidential elections, mostly other elections as well on that day, and opposition leader Ousmane Sonko and others have been released. Have a look.
The duo's release came after a political and constitutional crisis initiated by President Macky Sall's decision to postpone the February 25th presidential vote. However, their release was expected following last week's passage of an amnesty law for acts committed in connection with political demonstrations since 2021. Prior to its submission to a parliamentary vote, the draft amnesty law was endorsed during the national dialogue of 26th to 27th February.
There we heard Lolly M. Camara. So the duo she mentions at the head there is Diomaye Faye and Ousmane Sonko. They're not the only ones. Others have also been released as part of a general amnesty. And in fact, I downloaded a video of Diomaye Faye being greeted at his home by lots of elders and young folks, as well as people dancing in the streets, Mr. Mboj.
Absolutely, but that was only to be expected, isn't it? Given the popularity, really, of Pastef, Sonko and Islam, in urban areas among youth.
And for me, I've been following this very, very closely, and they were quite sniffy and quite dismissive, Pastef, saying that we know that this amnesty has been granted as a result of the dialogue. We didn't ask for the dialogue, we didn't attend the dialogue, and we don't care about what happened at the dialogue. It's like, don't be so, whatever. I don't know what phrases that I can use for being so, ungracious, really. But that's the stance that they've taken.
This is the identity. International papers, they often refer to Ousmane Sonko as the firebrand. That tells you all. That's really
with that.
That's their style.
Sure.
So, fine, Sonko wouldn't run. Obviously, they haven't changed the number.
That's right. It's still 19.
That's right. So they've now we will back Diomaye Faye.
Sure.
So now we'll see what's going to happen in this election.
Well, this is it. I mean, we always said it's a bastion of democracy and everything else. This has been one of the more, for those who are very young, one of the more serious constitutional and electoral crises that they've had. But for people like myself, we've seen worse in Senegal. But interestingly, on the second day of campaigning, there were actually street fights between opposing sets of supporters. So it's not all kind of lovey-dovey and peaches and cream.
Oh, absolutely, because once you've got that virus, if you can call it that, of violence in political situations,
Sure.
then it will come from any quarters, particularly in a period of elections.
Oh, indeed,
it can come.
indeed.
So you just want your security forces to handle it and be even-handed.
Well, this is it.
Because you
And-
want to carry people with you, really.
And we discussed it in the office, and people were kind of, oh, but you know, we thought because it's Ramadan, that would actually kind of cool the tempers, but seemingly not. And so, you know, we are where we are. From the date it was announced to the election date, they've only got 2 weeks of campaigning, as I said, 24th. And yeah, I mean, they've all been pulling big crowds, including the supposedly unpopular Amadou Ba, who pulled a huge crowd. I think just to silence all those who said he wasn't popular. But nonetheless, quite an interesting contest,
It is
potentially.
it is the power of incumbency.
Well, indeed.
Yes,
indeed,
you have the resources, you have
Yes.
certain privileges,
Well, that's
as
right.
it were, that others do not have. So this is that. Unfortunately, in Senegal, you do not have opinion polls, and I'm sort of reluctant to rely on social media. We know that public square
quite,
can
yeah.
be like,
Well,
they
that's
just
right.
cannot tell you much. So this is uncharted territory in every sense
I
of
mean,
the term.
we
you
went
know what I
deep into
mean?
this discussion in the office till, I don't know, 10 o'clock last night. And somebody was again talking about, because we were viewing online the videos Past ever posted of these people running. And I said, I used this phrase, I said, not everybody who sings and dances votes. And not everybody who votes sings and dances.
Absolutely.
You know, don't confuse the two things. You know, half of those dancing in the streets probably don't even have a voter's card, probably not even old enough to vote. So don't be swayed by those sorts of numbers. You know, look at other things. But these days, social media can be very persuasive to those outside of a country, and I think that's where we find ourselves. in Senegal.
Absolutely. And we've been observing elections in a few years across at least the region,
Well,
at the
indeed.
very least.
Yeah, sure.
In Nigeria, what happened there?
Peter Obi.
Peter Obi, social
The youth
media.
vote was going to sweep him to the presidency.
Extraordinary.
And
it
yet,
didn't
lowest
happen.
youth vote turnout in 30 years.
Sierra Leone.
Yeah, quite. Yes,
The-
yes, Yumkela.
In Kala, the
Same
same thing
thing.
happened there.
Yeah, quite.
So that has sort of taught us to be a bit circumspect.
I think so.
You know,
I
one
think
is
so.
careful
And we
about
go
these
further
things.
to Uganda,
Yes.
of course, Bobby Wine.
Bobby Wine,
You know,
absolutely.
again, it was going to be swept to power by the youth. It didn't happen. You know.
That is it. So, but there's so much potential in there. Which politician? We need a politician of the moment who can come and rally the youth. You win easily because they're just
There are
there.
so- there are
It's
so
just that
many.
nobody can tap into that.
This is
How
it.
do you politicize
Yeah,
them?
quite.
You know,
Because for some of them, they're
it's just-
becoming a bit more sophisticated. They're no longer fooled by people who say, I believe in the youth, and, you know, they'll ask you the simple question, how can you create jobs for youth? 100, 1,000, 10,000. Simple question. If you can answer it, they might vote for you. But if you just say, I will empower the youth, nobody's fooled by that anymore.
Absolutely. But the youth also, I think they've gone cynical. The expectations are really too high.
Sure.
They really have no understanding of how you run
The-
government.
the nuances
You don't
of-
really, the
Yeah,
nuances.
Right.
You don't know really how scarce resources are.
Yeah.
And we are a very funny lot. We do things that we blame politicians doing,
Yeah, quite.
but in our own ways, the corrupt, dysfunctional behavior that we
Quite.
have.
Yes,
So
it's-
the
it's-
state is really not benefiting,
Yeah,
as it
quite.
were. We are so dysfunctional. What
Quite.
we do is just so dysfunctional to any efficient running of a state.
This is it.
So we have to look ourselves in the mirror.
And we don't.
And we don't. So this is going to be a massive problem. We've been crying since independence, 58,
Sure.
60 years.
Yeah, quite.
Why is that?
Yeah, quite.
You see, we
Yeah,
like saying,
right.
oh, it's the politician. But I'm like,
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
A
And it
PhD
yeah.
politician can come and be a president, do exactly as the non-educated army officer, maybe, I don't know,
Yeah,
sergeant, lieutenant, whatever.
Yeah, quite.
Similar attitudes,
But this
the
is-
kleptocracy and all the rest of it, the
Sure.
bad management. So it's something deeper than just the government or lack of education.
Well, you'll have somebody blaming the government and politicians, and then that same person is probably trying to dodge from paying the full taxes
Absolutely.
he should pay in a tax-based economy.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, we can't win because of that certain thing, and
Absolutely.
yet that person will never see themselves as corrupt.
Yes, and perhaps I'm a middleman somewhere, is it GRA or any of these places where I get police licenses, or there are so many middlemen. They'll take your money, take it over there, they'll get a license.
As somebody was saying the other day from the
Absolutely.
police, everything you go
Yeah.
for, there seems to be an agent, when there should not be anybody between you and the authority that's issuing the license.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So I think that should be the discussion.
Yeah.
We should go beyond, our politicians this. That means you've really missed the point.
Yeah, quite, totally. But thank you for that. So Senegal, we will keep a weather eye on this one and see what happens. 24th of March, we're nearly there, and it's just around the corner. So definitely one to look for, just really a week away, literally. Thank you, Mr. Mboj. And that takes us to our final story. Yes, 5 stories in case you've just joined for whatever reason. Nigeria, they've decided to lift their sanctions on Niger, not just them, ECOWAS as well. Have a look and have a listen.
Since the imposition of sanctions, Niger and 2 other military-led nations, Mali and Burkina Faso, have declared to permanently withdraw from ECOWAS after their suspension from the regional bloc. During a summit in Abuja on the 24th of February, following dialogue and consultations with the military and a plea from former Nigerian President Yakuba Gowon, ECOWAS decided to lift all the sanctions imposed on Niger and the other military juntas.
There we heard sanctions lifted not just on Niger, but on the others. But probably for most people, the pressure on Nigeria was probably greatest, Mr. Mboj, because of obviously the border, the culture, and the sheer volume of trade between Niger and Nigeria, and how those people who did that trade on a daily basis were suffering. They really were pressuring the government.
And it was hurting both.
Well, indeed.
Because Nigerian citizens at the border were suffering. They relied on that so much.
That's right.
It seems practical wisdom has
prevailed
over abstract idealism.
Well, indeed. Because when we're talking about abstract, don't forget, it's not so long ago they were talking about possible use of force to enforce these sorts of sanctions and to force these people to, you know, sort of return to the barracks and hand over back to civilian rule. That's gone out of the window because, you know, reality has kind of smacked them in the face.
Absolutely. So now they should focus on perhaps the release of Bazoum.
Well, indeed. That has to
is
be
quite significant.
a target. Yes.
And sort of redefine its role. I don't know, are we following the West too much in that sense? You cannot impose democracy from the top.
Correct.
It is not going to happen.
Correct.
As long as you have this dysfunctional civil governments and that window, as it were.
Because even in Guinea-Conakry, just on Friday, you know, Doumbouya hinted, I think, after he came from the mosque, that they might not go to elections in November after all. And now that he's really entrenched himself, you know, everywhere he goes, 4 or 5 cameras follow him. His wife is now being referred to as the First Lady, and she's been going and opening schools and hospitals and everything else. He's loving it.
Yep.
And you're right. For some people, it's working, and so you're right that you can't impose. And for them, they don't care if they get good schools, good hospitals, and good infrastructure. They don't care whether they voted for that person or not, because you know, what will impact their lives.
And this is the lesson we've learned here. Yeah. Continue pursuing that so-called abstract idealisms, you risk splitting ECOWAS.
Well, indeed.
This threat of a split was massive, really,
and it's still dangling
making
there.
them,
the removal of the sanctions might make the ones reconsider, but they haven't said so yet.
No.
They've welcomed the removal of the sanctions, you know, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. But they've not said, okay, now we're going to withdraw our threat to leave ECOWAS. That's still dangling there. I guess they want to see how things develop.
Absolutely, but what it does is that it now puts the whole relationship on repair mode.
Indeed.
You can repair things now.
Right.
So there will be some pressure also on these military men. Okay, these people, ECOWAS, with these overtures of peace, how do you respond to them? Because you don't want to look bad either.
Exactly.
So that's it. It's an interesting chess. So they've pushed it back to you. Possibly people like Gowon,
Yeah, quite.
Yakubu,
Yes, quite.
Afzal,
Yeah.
the only surviving member of the 1975
That's right. That's right.
leadership.
That's right.
And he said, welcome them back.
He welcomed them back, and they've welcomed them,
Lift
or they've
the
tried to welcome
sanctions.
them back. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And they actually did. They made
Sure.
the move.
Yeah, quite.
But a few days after he had said
Well,
that.
well, that's right. That's right.
You know.
They had the
Yeah.
extraordinary meeting, and then they announced the move.
They announced it.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mboj. And for anybody who's watching, I'm not going to say join us after the break, because during Ramadan, this is it. 5 stories, and that's the end. Just to say thank you, Mr. Mboj, for your interventions.
My pleasure, Adi.
And to all the viewers, thank you for watching. Until next time, goodbye.